Just to follow up on the aspect of the impacts of a complete ban, it's hard to imagine that the impacts of a complete ban would be a lot worse than the impacts of what's going on right now. We are enabling, so it just seems like that might be a little bit more self-serving for us in the industrial world, that we don't want to do this too fast because we want those materials, versus the economic impact that we create in country by the ban. It seems to me there might be no faster way to get their attention and get action moving than by that complete ban.
And there are many opinions on this, as there are fish in the sea, I think. But what I want to say is, in fact, in some cases it's the industry wanting to stick and push hard, and it's our colleagues on the ground who are saying, no, don't do that just yet. And so it's not necessarily industry that's trying to hold back. It's not always the way that you described it. So it's a really complicated issue with lots of different perspectives. Some parts of the industry want to push forward, some parts want to wait, some parts of the NGOs want to push forward, some parts want to wait. So it's extremely difficult to come to consensus on when is the right time to take that line and say enough is enough.
We should not be overly reliant on purely legislation. I think it's that this is a very good movement that the US is taking this step, and it's a very, very powerful step. But if you look at many of the legislation that happened to other initiatives, like the European Union coming up with the we and the roles on trying to control the lead or bad materials into the product. And the Chinese government also has come up with all kinds of pollution control and so on. It took a long time before companies really eventually respond. And I think that the reason is, number one, is that it's hard to audit completely. And number two is that companies, there are ways to get around it, and there are some companies not as progressive as HP that will take the initiative, and there are many that are just trying to find a way to avoid the problem as much as they could. And then number three is that the fines and the consequence of breaking the law sometimes is not enough as a deterrent. When I studied the water pollution problem in China, many of the companies are just willing to pay fines. They say, I'll just pay fines. Because paying fines is actually a lower cost than if I have to fix the problem completely. And the Chinese government, some of the local governments are happy to just receive fines year after year. It's fine. Yeah, that's like an income. So I don't treat the problem completely. It's actually not that. So I think legislation is a powerful way, but it does not replace many of the efforts that you are doing now, which is ultimately it has to be the consumers and the investors, the shareholders, that give the pressure to the companies to change behaviors.
And I would say that the companies, the electronics industry is really ahead of the game. They started researching this, a couple of years ago. And why? Because there was the outside NGO pressure saying you guys need to pay attention to this issue starting about 2007. But I was speaking last week at another ethical sourcing forum in New York and sat next to somebody who's from the toy industry. And she's like, works for a toy brand. And she's like, wow, I didn't even know that this was going to impact us. And talking to people in the apparel industry, a lot of them sell jewelry, gold-plated jewelry, or if you think footwear, well, there's those shoes, those little kids' shoes with blinking lights in them. They're soldered, anything that's soldered. So anything that's got a wire in it. So it really does impact the entire manufacturing industry. But because the electronics industry kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, wow, we need to figure this out, they're way ahead of the game than a lot of the other industries. So like you're saying, it was before the legislation that they started looking into it. Why? Because the NGO pressure was there. So it's interesting to see the different pressure points of each of the different groups and what creates that incentive to go ahead and start taking action. And regarding the ban, I just also want to say that we've been going through our contacts of people on the ground saying, okay, is this a good thing or not a good thing? Because we want to do what's best for the people on the ground. So tell us, should the ban go into effect now or not? And there's a whole slew of opinions. Some people are like, yeah, it's great, keep it, it's incentive, it's going to help us change things. And other people are like, oh, but, no, it's too quick. And so it has been a very challenging issue to actually try to figure out the timing of it.
One of my questions goes to our third-party auditors. Who are those auditors going to be? Are they going to be industry-specific or mineral-specific? There's going to be an audit certification for tin, and tungsten, and tantalum, all in their own right? Or is there going to be any third-party auditor that sort of oversees the entire process? Because it sounds like the legislation mandates that aspect of it. So if everyone inside the industry is doing the due diligence, who outside the industry is going to be doing that audit? And then a question for Professor Lee specifically in regards to, you say that industry and supply chain deals with sense and respond as their main framework. What about foresight? Where does foresight play a part in the design process and doing supply chain management and sort of looking ahead and understanding the geopolitical and economic forces that are all playing parts in the products themselves?
As far as I understand it, and I've been out for a few months having a baby, so I may be slightly behind. As far as I understand it, the audit process is not done by the industry, but we have defined the audit criteria and will play a monitoring role of looking at the auditor competence that we have, but conventional auditing firms, if you like, more in the social and environmental auditing space as opposed to the, say, financial auditing space. These would be the types of auditors that we're looking at who would meet our criteria for doing those audits. So they're independent of us, but auditing to the criteria that we've established. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I can add to that. So the legislation where it says that the report has to be audited by a third-party auditor, that's like, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, the big auditing firms who are also auditing their financial statements, right? But that legislation doesn't say that the smelter has to be audited, right? So then when you start talking about the conflict-free smelter program and who audits the smelters, those are the auditors that Zoe's referring to, which are they're like CSR type auditors, people who do compliance, factory compliance auditing for child labor, slave labor, codes of conduct, that type of thing. And that they're being paid for, because I think the other point you didn't ask for is cost, because auditing is not cheap, and so who is going to pay for this? So it's the smelters that have to pay to have their own factory audited, right? But and there's several auditors who are, around the world, because these smelters are in Malaysia and China and, US, others. So they have to be able to actually go to the factories and see all their documentation, where they're getting their stuff. Then on the ground, there's like another whole system, the whole, what's going to be a certification system, which there's regional certification through the ICGLR, the International Great Lakes Region, Conference of the Great Lakes Region. So it's 11 countries that are going to coordinate their own certification of where their minerals are coming from. And they're doing that because there's so much smuggling that goes on that they have to ensure that the whole region is doing some certification so they can have those checks and balances and know quantities, especially volume, so they can have those checks and balances on volumes. And so the current bag and tag system that the Tin Association has been working on and has been where they're looking to have that paid for is from the comptoirs, who are going to the exporters. But with the ban, the more recent ban on the region, where the president banned export from the region, the comptoirs then were saying, oh, well, now, we can't export anything, so now we don't have any money to pay for this. So that's a challenge. It's like, okay, how where's their seed money to really get these things up and going? But in my opinion, the costs for all of this need to be implemented into the cost of the products, because otherwise they're not sustainable. If you're constantly looking for, USAID to help pay for it, or other kind of more philanthropy, whether that be government or private money, that's not sustainable. It actually has to be included in, per kilo of this ore, so that it gets also distributed to all industries. Then everybody who's going to be using the minerals at the end should have to incur some costs, but ideally the price won't be that high. It'll be a couple of cents more per pound, but it all adds up.
Yes, a lot of jobs creation in every stage of the process.